The Minnesota 8 trials, still a very relevant and controversial period in history. At the forefront were 8 politically active students from the University of Minnesota who were protesting the United States' attempt to occupy Vietnam.
It was a privilege to have been a young man in the 1960s. It was an awesome time to be around. It was an awesome time to be young. It was an awesome time to be involved in social movement.
Big things where people were standing up and weren't going along with what was happening with their governments, and so it was like this, just really intellectually and emotionally, and it's just all these things happening. Plus, we decided we're going to try and change the world.
I started to notice more in the 63, 64, 65, like that. I became real aware of, or increasingly aware of, the civil rights movement and all the struggles involved with that. And that was sort of my, the thing that drew me into whatever public affairs, the events of the day kinds of interests that I began to have really started with that. And so that colored my impressions of things that happened later on.
It was an era where civil rights had been part of our sort of radar screen for ages, sort of agitation for social change, desire for improvement in society, and sudden realization that things were pretty mixed up in a lot of ways.
Arriving to make known his new decisions on Vietnam to a highly tensed Washington press conference, which is attended by his family, President Johnson explains the reasons for his actions in these historic words.
We intend to convince the communists that we cannot be defeated by force of arms.
The war was really a live thing because it kept on cranking up more and more, and kids that I was in high school with who were older than me were already looking at or fearing being drafted. It was something that was in everybody's thoughts all the time. Once you were 17, 18 years old, if you weren't oblivious, then that mattered to you a lot then.
I was too scared. The first national draft card turn-in, and that was in October of '67. We had a little one in December, but by the third national draft card turn-in day, on April 3rd, 1968, I was ready to turn my cards. I was strong in my mind, and I knew the intellectual reasons why to do it, and I thought it was a good way to try and help end the war. And there was about 23 of us who turned our draft cards in. Now, this was something that was illegal. To turn in your cards, you're supposed to have them with you at all times. But this was a way of non-violently expressing our opposition to the war.
I just wasn't quite ready to step into the teeth of the justice system by refusing to register. And how many 18-year-olds are ready to do something like that? Because the penalties were harsh, and it was, in 1968, it was still, you were opposing the state in a real profound kind of way.
It just seemed so unfair and not the right way to do it, and so disappointed me. So I became a really participant in trying to oppose it. And I think a big thing was when I went to the previous, in the October of '67, when I went to, we marched on the Pentagon.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest. For the most part orderly, minor scuffles did occur between the demonstrators and hecklers. A 3-hour parade takes the demonstrators across the Potomac on their way to the Pentagon. The crowd, estimated at about 50,000 persons, was a loose confederation of some 150 groups. Federal marshals arrest several who attempt to break through the protective line. Reinforcing the marshals, a second wave of...
we went there, and then they had the police lines, but somehow some people were there. There's probably 100,000 people there. They got through the lines, and we rushed the building. And there was this one group who were something to support the National Liberation Front. They rushed in the doors, and they just got bang, 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 and they're dragged out bloody and all this here. But most of us just sat down.
The same weekend saw nationwide demonstrations supporting American GIs in Vietnam. The Pentagon protest was less violent in its second day of sitting in. The two-day protest ends with over 600 arrested and the widespread opinion that the demonstration made everyone a loser.
I got asked to give a lot of speeches. And in giving speeches about the war, or why the war was wrong, you wouldn't just end up confronting what was good or bad about the Vietnam War historically or presently. You'd have to answer, why are these people in California burning flags, this, that, or the other thing? And one of the questions then came to me, what do you think about these draft board raiders? Hey, listen, I was a straight kid from St. Paul, breaking the law, smoking marijuana was the most I was ever going to do. But I had to have an answer in giving speeches. What do you think about these draft board raiders? Well, I had to finally conclude that what I thought they were doing was justified. Even if it was against the law, there was such an evil going on, such deceit, like I said, by a rogue government causing thousands and thousands of deaths on a regular basis.
Right. What's going to happen to civilians who might get caught in there? Well, we're hoping that we don't run into any civilians in there right now. If they are, I'm pretty sure there are civilians that are what we would consider the bad guys right now. We have certain areas in here that we have blocked off, that we know there are friendly civilians, and we aren't going to take those under fire. The others? The others, if there's somebody in there right now, they're Charlie as far as we're concerned.
The small illegal activity of breaking the law in order to try to prevent murder on a wholesale basis was justified.
And I actually said to people I knew who had taken part in the February of 1970 draft board raids in the Twin Cities, I said, if you're going to do this again, I want to be in. I really felt disappointed and upset that I hadn't known about and been able to take part in the other raids. So I didn't, so I volunteered. And I felt like at the time that I and we were part of something that was really helping to try to bring the country to its senses.
Unfortunately, there were FBI agents waiting. About midnight, we'd had to climb up guy wires and go through this window that was always unlocked, went through this room where they had band instruments, walked down the hallway, got to the second floor of the, there's a drugstore on the first floor, and we had to use some burglar techniques to get in, and just had gotten, we were looking for the 1A, that's the people who would be drafted first, looking for these files, because we were going to throw them in the river, because Winona was right on the Mississippi. And but they came in and arrested us.
I'll never forget standing inside the darkened Selective Service office in the second floor, a little building in Alexandria, Minnesota, and all of a sudden see a silhouette of a man with a gun in the door, and the words, "Don't move or you're dead," it's the FBI. You go, oh darn, hadn't planned on this. We hadn't planned on being arrested. I planned on continuing my above ground organizing activity, and this was just my counting coup and being what I said I supported. As it turns out, the fact that we were arrested made it a much more profound event, a much more influential event insofar as influencing public opinion than if we hadn't been arrested.
Looking back on it, it was energizing and the sort of thing that most people don't get a chance to take part in. And I feel really lucky to have been able to be just barely old enough to be doing that then, because those times don't come around very often.